All right. Welcome everyone to the May Day edition of the Symbiota support group this May 1st, 2022. Sorry, 2023, a year behind here. Just very quick announcements before we start getting into our topic. There will be no Symbiota support group, so this meeting will not happen in June because we will be at the Society of the Preservation of Natural History Collections meeting, followed by the Digital Data Conference, which, speaking of which, that is June 5th through 7th. It's at Arizona State University, which is the hub of the Symbiota Support Hub. So that's going to be a fun time. I think almost the entire Symbiota Support Hub is going to be at this meeting. And we wanted to particularly bring your attention to, on day one of this meeting, we're having a 2-hour Symbiota Skillshare and capacity building workshop. It will be in person. We're not providing a virtual version, because if you need that, then just come to Symbiota support group. But if you have the ability to go to this conference, we would love to see you in person at this event. And that's going to be on June 5th. The conference itself is really great. Lots of research being shared and really good discussions about databases, about data use, about data research, about kind of the next generation of digital data from biodiversity specimens. So it's going to be a really good time. And Lindsay has been putting links to the registration and the information about this in the chat. Are there any other announcements from the group, or Lindsay, am I missing anything?
I think that's good on our end.
Okay, then I'll go ahead and move forward. So today we are going to be talking about creating and managing checklists in Symbiota portals. And this actually has an interesting background where Symbiota was created originally with the intention of being a checklist creation tool. So these are some of the oldest tools that exist. And for that reason, sometimes they're a little bit clunky, but they are some of the bread and butter of what Symbiota was created for. So just fun fact there. So we're going to be talking about what checklists in Symbiota portals actually are, what that means in terms of this software. We're going to talk about how you can create checklists, because there are a lot of ways that you can create checklists, and we'll walk through a couple of examples together. We'll talk about managing voucher specimens, so specimens that may be linked to your checklists, and how you can add and remove and change vouchers. We'll talk about permissions that you can give for checklists, linking between checklists, and then there are games associated with checklists, I think on most portals. And then go through a couple of FAQs or troubleshooting things that people often run into when they're dealing with checklists. Okay, so let's just start with the basics. What are checklists in Symbiota portals? Very basically, they are lists of taxa. That is, in essence, what a checklist is. Not a list of specimens per se, it is a list of taxa that can be found in the portal that you're working in. So that is an important point, that they do need to be taxa that are found in that Symbiota portal, meaning they should be in the taxonomic thesaurus of that portal. I don't remember if there might be tools in the future where you can add like morpho species, but those have not been developed yet. I know those have been kind of in high demand in some taxonomic groups, but for now, it's a list of taxa that are in the taxonomic thesaurus. And those taxa are often related to a specific project or specific location, and they may or may not be related to specific records in the portal. So you do not need to have a specific specimen or observation of a specific taxon in the portal in order to put that taxon in your checklist. So a checklist can be based off of an existing list or off of specimens, but it doesn't need to be relating to specimens necessarily. In Symbiota portals, there are kind of two main types of checklists. There are dynamic checklists, which are temporary, and then there are static checklists. And those are ones that you would create, you would add metadata to, and you would curate over time. Whereas dynamic checklists are usually used by only like front-end portal users when they want to make like a quick and dirty list of what is found in a certain area based off of specimens. So I'm going to demo the dynamic checklists, but the majority of this presentation is going to be talking about static or saved checklists, because that's probably, well, requires a little bit more explanation than the dynamic checklists. So checklists are used in a number of different uses. So you can create inventories for specific regions. In the botanical community, it's pretty common to create a flora of a region. So that's all of the species of vascular plants or whatever found in a specific region. They can be really useful for generating lists that you might want to use in the field. So if you are working in SciNet, there are a bunch of field-based images in that portal that if you create a checklist of, you know, species that you might expect to find in a specific region, and then you print them out with the images, then you could use that as like a little guide for yourself, like a field guide based on those field images. Again, depends on what portal you're working in, because some portals have more field images than others, but it can be useful to produce an image guide. You can also use checklists to link taxa in publications to voucher specimens. So you could have a checklist that was created from a publication, and then you could import that and then link vouchers to it from right there. You can use checklists to export lists in Word documents or spreadsheets, and to create study aids. So I see a lot of checklists that people have made that are private, that are like, okay, this is my checklist for this particular class. So my class needs to know all of these species. And so the class has one place where they can go and find those lists of species and find resources related to those species. So these are just a couple of use cases. Okay, so dynamic checklists, as I mentioned, and I'm going to give you an example, is a place where you can conduct a search, and then you can either share or download that search and that dynamic checklist that you've created. And the difference, the major difference is that dynamic checklists are created by the software on the fly. So they don't store like a separate table of like, here are all the vouchers associated with this checklist. It's kind of like one line in the database saying like, use these criteria to produce a search. And so they might change between when you share the link with someone. If a new specimen is added, then that taxon would be added to that dynamic, because it's dynamic. Every single time you go to that link, it's created anew. Whereas the static checklists will just be anything that you add is included in there, but new taxa or new vouchers are not automatically added to that checklist. So let's just see what that means, or what that looks like in practice. So I got here by going to the Consortium of Midwest Herbaria, and I went to this interactive tools, and I clicked dynamic checklist. Usually a dynamic checklist tool will be found in the toolbar of your portal, but this is not necessarily front and center in a lot of portals. So you might have to find it in some other way. If you have trouble finding it on your portal, then let us know and we can point it out to you. So with a dynamic checklist, you can say, okay, I just want to create a quick and dirty checklist of, let's say, Sheboygan, Michigan. So I zoom in here to Sheboygan and I put my cursor right here in the middle, and then I can decide how big of a radius I want. Let's say I want like 50 miles. And I could say whether I want it to be like, okay, let's just do all of the Asteraceae, that's the sunflower family, within 50 miles of Sheboygan. So I'm going to build a checklist and it's going to do a search. So here's the point that I had given, and within 80 kilometers of that, it found 143 species in the family Asteraceae that were near Sheboygan. So again, this is like a quick and dirty checklist that you can just use to see what's in a particular area. And you notice that I can't necessarily save this, and I can't add any details to it or name it. It's just, I have gotten a species list. You can kind of also do this using the main search. So if I go into search collections, and let's just produce a big search of, again, all of Asteraceae, and boy, I'm not going to remember how to spell Sheboygan, so I'm just going to say St. Louis is in the locality. If I go list display, and in this case, my search criterion is different. It's using a string instead of a point and radius. But in any case, any search that you can do, you can go to this species list tab, and it will give you, again, a quick and dirty list of all the species that match the search that you've created. So this is not really the same thing as a checklist, but you could make this into a checklist in the future. Okay, so those are dynamic checklists, and I'm going to talk for the rest of this time mostly about static checklists. So checklists that you create and then you save and then you curate according to your needs. So again, I'm going to have an example. And this is a real world example that I am using to create a list of species for a region that I plan to go do a floristic inventory on. So what I did is I created this specific checklist based off of specimens, and I'll show you how to do that, that I can then use as my reference guide. When I'm out there, I can say, okay, what species are in this family? So this is what a checklist looks like. And if you are the editor or the administrator of that checklist, then there are a number of tools that you can use in this checklist. If I go over here to this options table, there are different ways that I can display my checklist. Right now I have display as images checked, but if I uncheck that and then rebuild my list, you're going to see it look just like a list of species. And there's probably several pages here. Oh no, it's all on one page. It will give you some general overviews about that checklist, so how many species there are, and then you can change what you want to show up in that checklist here. So if I wanted the common names, I could put them here if there are any common names. I could also say, show me the notes and vouchers, show me the taxon authors, show the taxa alphabetically according to genus then species. So there are a couple of different options you can do. And you can set which ones are going to be your default while you're starting the checklist. So this is generally what they look like. Oops. Okay, so let's talk about how you can create a checklist of your own. And there are a number of ways that we can do this. The most simple is that you can create a checklist from an existing list. So say you had created one in a Word document and you could bring that in. Or you could make a checklist from records in the portal. And that's what I did to create that Fish Creek region checklist that I was talking about. So I wanted to pause and make a quick note. Since June 2022, there actually is a specific permissions level that you need in a Symbiota portal in order to make a checklist. Once upon a time, you could just create a user account and you could create checklists immediately, but then people or bots started using them for spam and putting advertisements on them. So now you actually have to be given access to create checklists in portals. But any collection administrator, so that means not just like a super user, but an administrator, anyone who has admin permissions of a collection, can give any user permissions to create a checklist. So if you know an administrator in SignEdit or in Vertibase or whatever, then you can say, hey, can you give me checklist creation permissions? And they can do that pretty easily. I guess I could show you how to do that real quick. So let's say I'm a administrator. All I would need to do is go into my occurrence management. And any collection, you can do this from the admin control panel of any collection. You go into manage permissions. And then if you scroll all the way to the bottom of that page, there is an option that says checklist dataset management sponsorship. And you could select from that drop-down menu any user in the entire portal, and that would give them create checklist permissions. So just be in contact if you don't have those permissions, and know that people might ask you for those permissions if you're a collection administrator. Okay, so let's talk about creating a checklist from an existing list. And I'll pop out, go back in here. So to create a checklist, generally, you go into My Profile. And then the first tab will say Species Checklists. And you will click this green button. And it will say, all right, you want to create a new checklist. So this is where you'll provide, name, authors. You can select what type of checklist it is. A species exclusion list would be a checklist that you create that you could link then, if I'm remembering this correctly, link to another checklist and say, in this parent species list, exclude all of these species that are in this child checklist. We can go into that a little bit further when we talk about linkages between checklists. And then there is such thing as a rare, threatened, or protected species list, and that is specifically for defining rare taxa that might have their locality information redacted from the public. But we'll talk about that probably in a future Symbiota support group meeting. You can put in information, just metadata about your locality, citation, etc. You can define here whether this belongs to a more inclusive reference checklist. So if this is like one checklist as part of many, you could select that here. You can say the lat long of where that checklist is based, if it's a regional checklist, or you could give a polygon footprint, and then you can also say what your default display settings are going to be. So previously I had, in the example that I had shown, I had display as images selected so that whenever I open it, I'm looking at all the field images instead of just the names. Oh, thanks, Frank. Yeah, when we get to that section, I would love to see your example of exclusion lists. And then you can decide whether you want the access to that checklist to be private or public. So public means that you can share the link with anyone and they can look at that checklist. And also, if it's part of a project, then it will automatically show up on the projects page. Otherwise, private means that this is just my checklist. Anyone I give editor permissions to are going to be able to see it, but it's not necessarily visible to anyone else. And then you click create checklist and you're ready to go. So I'll just quickly make a test here. You don't need any of this information to be filled out necessarily. So I'm just going to create. Okay, so if you want to add taxa from an existing list, then you can add them one by one through this add species to list. Or if you want to batch upload names, then you will go down to the bottom of this yellow box and click batch upload spreadsheet. If you don't see this yellow box that says add species to list, then go up to the top right, and there's a toggle that says edit species list that you can turn off and on. So if I scroll down to this where it says batch upload spreadsheet, this is a way that you can bring in taxa in batch. And note that there are a couple of parameters that you need to follow to create a CSV file that can be imported into this specific tool. So you need to have a CSV file that's a comma separated value file, which you can save from an Excel document if you need to. And it needs to have, at minimum, this one column. It needs to have a SciName column. And it must be named SciName specifically with no caps, no spaces, just like that. And then there are a number of fields that you can also include optionally. So family, habitat, automatically it will be provided family based on the taxonomic thesaurus. So you don't have to worry about, oh, shoot, I have to go figure out what the families are for all of my taxa. It'll be auto-populated. But sometimes you have a different family structure than maybe what's in the taxonomic thesaurus. So that's okay to include your override. Habitat, abundance, notes, internal notes, and source are all options. And when you apply these to a specific taxon in your checklist, they will only apply to your checklist. So if you put in habitat, marshy places, it's only going to show up in your checklist. It's not going to show up like in the taxon description pages. So it's not going to apply broadly to the whole portal. So that's how you would upload your CSV file, and then it would give you a list of any errors that might have come up. So a potential error would be like, hey, I didn't find this taxon in the taxonomic thesaurus, so I didn't add it. So in that case, you would need to talk to a portal administrator and say, hey, can you add this taxon to the thesaurus so that it can be imported into my checklist? Okay, a couple of questions. Would authors be the person creating the checklist or the person that made the list from a published flora? I think you're referring back to when I was in the metadata page. So the authors would be probably person that made the list. It depends. Oh, go ahead.
I'm just thinking that, if I'm physically making this list and typing everything and uploading it, is it best practice for me to put my name? Or if I'm making a list that I found in a published paper that I want to use to do something just to keep track of it and look at it in a more interactive way, should I put authors of the paper?
That's a great question. And I would put the authors, if you're importing names like I'm showing right here, I would say that you should put the authors of the original flora until you make any changes. Like if you make any changes, then you might say originally published by blah, 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 currently curated by Brad, or just put that information in the description or something. Allison asks, what is source and how do you add designated voucher and photo? So the source is up to you. You could just say this is, I found it myself. I went to that location. And so you could say self, or you could say a certain publication, or you could say a certain voucher. And we'll talk through how to add designated vouchers in a second. And then Joni asks, I have lists that have old SciName. Would I have to update the batch list, the update before batch uploading? No, you do not. It doesn't need to be the most up-to-date scientific name in order to be brought into the thesaurus, in order to be brought into the checklist, as long as that name is in the taxonomic thesaurus somewhere. It doesn't have to be the most up-to-date taxon name.
If you're, one comment, if you're batch importing, see the batch import tool, it says taxonomic resolution. You could leave the old names as is, but if you want the thesaurus to update all the names automatically, then you pick the thesaurus. So.
Yeah, exactly. So if you wanted to say whatever the thesaurus says is the accepted name, just bring it in according to that. But if you want to say, no, just bring in only my names that are listed here, then you leave it as leave taxonomy as is.
And I have one comment on what Brad was asking about the authors.
Yeah.
If you are publishing, or if you are bringing in a pre-published checklist, it's best to cite the authors. But if you want to then build upon that, you can actually build another checklist and do a child-parent relationship, which Katie might talk about in a bit. And then you could use that other checklist that you build to actually start modifying and adding your taxa and so forth. And then you could put your author, and then, but notes would probably be good to say originally based on blah, blah, blah.
And Brad asked a follow-up question. If you choose the leave taxonomy as is, does it not link to the thesaurus? And I answered, no, it will always link to the thesaurus. If it cannot link to the thesaurus, it won't bring the taxonomic name in at all. So everything does need to be in the taxonomic thesaurus. It just does not need to be the most accepted name. Any other questions? Can I use other Symbiota portals to make a checklist? Yes, the checklist tools are available in, I don't want to say all, but I'm pretty sure it's all Symbiota portals. Frank, you have a question or comment?
No, I have a comment that you can actually display the checklist in both taxonomies. So the one you originally entered the data and the one that the data is being managed by the taxonomic thesaurus. So there's a display option to switch between the two.
Yeah, exactly. Good point. And I'll go back to my checklist and show that. Where you can say, here, I'm showing the original checklist, or if you switch to central thesaurus, then it's going to only list the names that are the accepted by the current thesaurus. Kier asks, should we all sponsor one another as checklist creators, or how shall I go about getting permission? I believe all administrators or editors automatically have checklist creator permissions, but if you don't, reach out to us and we'll help you get that. Okay, so I just explained how you can create a checklist from an existing list. You can do it individually, or you can batch upload a spreadsheet. But perhaps more commonly is you want to create a checklist from records that are in the portal. And this can be a little bit more complicated because there are a number of ways you can do this. So I have put together 3 options, and there are probably more ways that you could do this than I'm going to show you. So I'm going to actually share a link to this presentation so you can walk through the steps with me if you want. And I am on slide 19, and I think the sharing options are such that everyone can view. So if you want to, you can hop in there and look at these steps as we go. Okay, so here are a couple ways that you could create a checklist from voucher specimens. So step 1, I gotta move some stuff around so that I can see my own instructions. Okay, so step 1 is you create a checklist. And I already showed you how to do that. You go into your species checklists, you click the green plus sign, and then give all the information about that checklist. So I'm gonna select my test checklist that I already created. Then you go to voucher management. So there's in the top right corner, it says manage linked vouchers with a little pencil and a V. And now you need to define your search parameters. So how are you going to look for specimens in the area that you want to create a checklist for? So this can be a little bit tricky because you might have to end up creating a search statement, doing a list, doing a import, and then doing it over and over again with different criteria. Because say we wanted to do based on a specific location, I could say, okay, let's just pull up a map. And I want to do a checklist of, let's zoom in here. Oops, let's say I want to do a checklist of Lake Isabella. So I could make a point radius around Lake Isabella and say, all right, those are my search criteria, save and close. And then I could save search terms. Oops, I don't think it saved.
That only does the bounding box.
Oh, all right.
So those controls shouldn't be there. You could do a polygon too, though.
Okay, I'll do a bounding box. That's fine. Bounding box, check. Save and close. Then it will import into my bounding box fields. And then I can click Save Search Terms. So I have done steps 1 through 3 on slide number 19. I've created my search terms. Then I'm going to go to the Missing Taxa tab. And this is going to give me a list of all of the taxa that match my search criteria right here that are not in my checklist. So when in doubt, just read the explanation that's on that tab. So taxon names not found in the checklist, but are represented by one or more specimens that have a locality matching the above search term. Okay, so you can either look at it in a species list, and then you can open it up here. This little icon here says link voucher specimens. It will open up all of the, in this case, Abronia turbinata specimens that match my search criteria. And I could say like, oh, I believe J.D. Tilley that there was an Abronia turbinata here. And I could click individually this V with a plus sign that if you hover over it, it says link specimen voucher to test checklist. So that's if you want to be pretty exacting about which specimens you want to bring into your checklist. But if you're doing this in a little more quick and dirty way, or if you want to be able to just list everything that has been found in your area, then you might want to go over here in this display mode and switch it to batch linking. And this is going to give me a table of all of the specimens associated with taxa, again, matching these search criteria. And so if I wanted to batch add these all, what I could do is click the top leftmost checkbox, and that's going to check all of these in this whole entire table, at least as I can view it, the first, I think 400 taxa or something. And then I could batch add either all of the vouchers or all of the names without the vouchers. So this is a critical distinction. You can decide if you really want to use the vouchers themselves and to have them linked to these scientific names that are in your checklist, then you would want to click, you would want to leave this unchecked. So this is, I want the vouchers and the taxonomic names. If you just want the taxonomic names, but you don't necessarily want those specimens associated with it, then you could check this box and add names without linking the vouchers. So then you would only have a list of species. And if you click the view vouchers, nothing would show up. It would just be like, here's all your species that you said you wanted. So I'm going to uncheck that and click submit vouchers. And depending on your search criterion, you might have to do this a couple of times. So you can see that I'm still missing some taxa. So I'm going to do it another time. And these might be some errors. I'm not sure. Yeah, those seem to not want to add. Okay, so now we have done step 7. I'll come back over here. Step 7 here. And you might want to repeat this with new search parameters as necessary. So one problem with using a bounding box is that you are already limiting what can be found by things that have a coordinate. So that's something that you really got to consider, is that only about half, at least in this particular database, only about half of the specimens here are georeferenced, period. So if you want to find anything that is not georeferenced, then you might have to do this whole search again, but with different search criteria. So I did that really quick, but the way to change your search criteria is to click on the little pencil icon. It says edit search statement. And I can just clear this out. And I'm going to say, all right, well, let's do Lake Isabella. And then save those search terms and then see if there are any more taxa on this list. Look, I have a bunch more taxa that were represented by specimens that were not georeferenced either at all or within that bounding box that I showed. So I could again go to the batch linking tool and I could check the box. I could bring all those specimens or all of those, specimens and the taxa into my checklist. Okay, so that was option one of a way that you can create a checklist based off of vouchers. Another option is to, again, create a blank checklist and then conduct a custom search in the portal. So how would I do this? I come into search collections, and let's say I only want collections from a few different, or specimens from a few different collections. And I do a specific locality search. And then it gives me a bunch of specimens, only 18 at this point. Then I would click species list. And let's just go resolve to the central thesaurus. And what I could do is from this species list that was the result of a specific search, I could download this checklist as just like a CSV file. And now I have a CSV file that I can use. Oops, I must have moved it. A CSV that I can use to import into the batch upload taxon names page that I showed you before. So I downloaded, and then I could come back into my checklist, go over to the add species to list, and then I could batch upload a spreadsheet. So that kind of just depends on how specific of a search you want to do. And if you want to do it based off of things that are not the locality, so like the collections, or maybe a collector name, or maybe only specimens with images, or maybe specimens with certain traits, then you could do that, create a checklist, and then bring those specimen or those taxa into your list. Note that it's not going to automatically link the vouchers that you had that were coming from that result into your list. But if you wanted to do a specific search and just add the taxa, that's how you would do it. And Ed, you have a comment.
Yes. I just want to mention that if you're building it using the tools that she was showing on the voucher tools, can you go back to that checklist, actually, the public view?
This one?
Linking, is that it? Is that the one that, yeah, you made? Yeah, display it with not as images. Yeah, so now if you link vouchers, usually when someone's doing a flora, they'll very selectively list which vouchers they want to do. And generally, if you're doing a flora that you hope to publish, you're viewing those, you're verifying, you're looking at those specimens in the collection and verifying that they were ID'd correctly. You generally don't want to link all the collections specimens to a checklist, typically, unless you're creating a data set, unless you want to use it where you could create a data set. Because once you link the specimens, you could download the data as a report or a data package. However, there is a symbol to the right of each of the scientific names there that shows a table. No, the one to the left there, that will dynamically list all the specimens for the user. And that will be updated. That will show all the specimens at that time that are associated with that taxon. If you link all the specimens to your checklist, a year down the road, there's going to be more specimens that are not going to be viewed. But this link is automatically created if you define a search area, a geographic area, or some type of search term in the voucher tools for your checklist. So generally you don't want to link all the specimens to a checklist. You want to do it more selectively, but there's different people who are creating checklists for different reasons. So
yeah, great point, Ed. And that touches on a point that I'm going to make later in the troubleshooting section, where people will say, like, I click on this, but then it's not the same voucher specimens that I have listed. And it's for the very reason that Ed was saying, is that this does a dynamic search. So it's not necessarily viewing linked voucher specimens, it's viewing specimens that match the search criterion that you had previously indicated, that have this taxonomic name. So to your point, Allison, if you're seeing specimens that aren't necessarily in the area of interest, that's because if you go into this search criterion, your search criterion might be too vague or too broad. Okay, and then there is one more way that I was going to show you how to link vouchers, and that's by you create a blank checklist. So I'm in option 3 on slide 21. And you can create, let's go into, I don't even know if dynamic checklists are shown on CCH2, but if I do this from the Midwest portal, and I go to interactive tools, dynamic checklist, and I create a dynamic checklist. Let's just do one right here for 10 kilometers. Then I have this list of species, and maybe I wanted to save this, but as you can see, I can't save this right now as a checklist. You can click on this download checklist button in the options, and then you would use that to import it into the batch taxon adder or editor tool. So lots of different ways that you can add your taxa and add your vouchers to a checklist. Allison, so if we want to build a curated voucher checklist, we must build it voucher by voucher. No, because you could use that batch importing tool like I showed you earlier. So if I just went to a different test that I have here, and I go into manage link vouchers, you could go into the missing taxa table, and you could still use this batch linking, but not necessarily have to you don't have to check all these boxes. You could go in and you could individually at your leisure kind of go, okay, I do agree with that one. I think that one was really found at my location. Moving on. Okay, that one I agree with too. And so you don't have to add all of these and batch link them. You're going one by one, so to speak. But if you're wanting a really nice curated voucher checklist, then that's what you're going to need to do. Any other questions about this? Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about managing your vouchers. And by managing your vouchers, I just wanted to show you the options that you have in this voucher tab. So if I'm in my checklist here, I go into the voucher tab. There are quite a few cool tools that you might kind of get overwhelmed with the first time you look at. But first we have the non-vouchered taxa tab. So this just represents all of the taxa in your checklist, in this particular, my Laguna Lake checklist, that are found in your checklist, but don't have a voucher specimen that is the proof that this specimen occurs in that area. And maybe that's fine. Maybe you don't have specimens, but you went out and did your own survey, and those are taxa you have in there. But if you wanted every specimen to be, or every taxon to be linked to a voucher, then you would want to come in here and say, oh, maybe I need to look at what vouchers might exist, again, according to these criteria here, that I might want to add. So you go in, you decide whether you want to add those as vouchers. And then I wanted to point out this display mode here. So you can look for non-vouchered taxa. You can look for, so that's just of the, that's the list of taxa. If you want to look at the occurrences for non-vouchered taxa, you could do that here, but apparently there are none available. Or I could say new occurrences for all taxa. So these might be specimens that were added after I had first created my list of vouchers. And that might take a while to load, so I'm just going to move on here. So then we have our missing taxa tab, which I already showed you. And I think that's going to take a little while to load too. Maybe my criteria are too broad. Go back to my other checklist here. Okay, so missing taxa. I showed you the batch linking tool. You can look at it as a species list. You can look at it as a batch linking, or you can look at it at problem taxa. So these are taxa that have specimens matching these criteria here, but are not found in the taxonomic thesaurus. So these might be misspellings. These might be things that I need to request that the curator fixes before I can bring that into my taxonomic or into my checklist. Or you can say, oh, I want this species. Well, probably not a bryophyte, but I could say, oh, I want this species here. So I'm going to say this is should be Rosa woodsii. And if I found Ultramontana in here, then I would just select that. And then you could click link voucher. So then this species, this specimen would be linked to this taxon that I told it to be in my checklist. Allison asks, is there a way to comment to checklist authors to alert them to errors in their public checklists? That's a good question. I don't think there's a checklist comment tool. You would probably just need to get the contact information for the authors. Hopefully they've listed themselves there, and then you could send them an email. Okay, moving right along, let's talk about checklist permissions. And so if I'm going back to my checklist here, if you want other people to have the ability to add taxa, vouchers, whatever, to your checklist, then you'll want to go into the checklist administration tool here. And then you can add editors to your checklist. So that's just how you do it. You select them here, you add an editor, and then that person can add and remove and edit things associated with your checklist. This is also where you can go back and edit the metadata of your checklist. So if you go back into checklist administration, this is where you can edit the description, add related checklists, etc. So let's talk about linking between checklists. And these are a growing suite of tools. And, oh, I do have another slide on that. So checklists can be linked to one another according to parent-child relationships. And also checklists can be lumped together within a project. So a project can show up on like the master checklists page. For example, there is a California State Parks project and a county floras project. And I believe a super administrator needs to, or a project administrator needs to add your checklist to that project. So if you have a desire for your checklist to be part of one of these projects, you're going to have to contact a portal manager or a project manager of that particular project. But you can also link project or checklists as parent-child relationships. So you could say, I'm going over to my related checklists, And I could say, this is going to be a subset of a particular checklist. And I could click this button here and select a checklist from here if it was going to be a subset of more checklists, of a different checklist. Actually, that would, yeah, this is selecting child checklists. And then if you had a parent checklist, you could go to that parent checklist and then select any children checklists that you want linked together. And what that's going to do is it's going to automatically bring in any taxa in your child checklists into that parent checklist. So you're going to be able to look at the parent, and it's going to include all the taxa associated with all of the children. Okay, I wanted to show you the checklist games. So we know we're running out of time here, but they're just really nice for when you need to quiz yourself on a taxonomic group. This is why I've been creating a checklist for myself, is if you go into games over here, there are two options. There's the name game, which is just hangman. But then there's also a flashcard quiz. So it will show you any field photos of that taxon, and then you will have to select it from a drop-down list here. And you could also filter it saying like, okay, I just want to quiz myself on all the, ACMA spawns that exist. Oh, maybe that's not working. All right, bug fix needed. Okay, a couple of other things I wanted to mention, questions that we often get. How do I find new taxa that may need to be added to my checklist? And the answer to that would be to go into the voucher tools and then go to the missing taxa tab. So that's all the list of taxa that might need to be in my checklist. And I could view it in multiple different ways. Another question is, how do I sort my checklist? And there's often a desire, at least among plant people, that they want to have like bryophytes and lichens and vascular plants differently. You cannot sort according to those taxonomic distinctions with current existing tools. But what you could do is create a parent checklist that is all the taxa in represents all of the taxa. And then you can have a child checklist for just the bryophytes, a child checklist for just the lichens, a child checklist for just the vascular plants. And you could print those separately, and then you can join them in whatever order you want. And Ed just put a nice example in the, if you wanted to explain it.
Yeah, I was just saying, I put a nice example of this, of a checklist in Panama where it breaks it up. And we are planning on adding tools where you could sort based on higher taxonomies. However, this is still a more flexible, controlled way of breaking up in groups. For instance, the ferns and fern allies are not really a good taxonomic monophyletic group. So it allows you to create a checklist of whatever you want and break it up in whatever groups you want.
Yeah, great point. Okay, two more quick points or questions that we get asked. Why do I see specimens when I click view related specimens, but not when I view vouchers? And that's, I think we already answered that, but when you come over and you are viewing as a list, this will give you all of the specimens that match your search criteria. And there would be, if I had any voucher specimens, they would be listed in a different icon. So this is just doing a dynamic search. It does not only do the listed vouchers. And then last, but certainly not least, how do I delete a checklist? You'll go up to your administration, and then you will scroll down to the bottom of the admin and then click delete checklist. But note that before you do that, you have to remove any editor permissions that exist by clicking the X. Then you click delete checklist and then bye-bye checklist. All right, a question in the chat. The Atlas of the Vascular Flora of Arkansas hasn't been updated for over a decade. Would it be feasible to upload the data of vouchered specimens by county for the old atlas as children of a new parent checklist to update county floras? Yeah, I think you could give it a shot. You can make as many checklists as you want, link them to a parent checklist, and see how that shakes out. Other questions? Checklists can be a lot of bells and whistles and a lot of different things that you can fiddle with. And I say just go in and try it out. Like say, okay, for half an hour, I'm going to just try to do this thing. We have some great documentation and some training videos. And I will put a link to those in the chat if Lindsay hasn't already, but probably in the beginning. And Allison, Ed's example is on a Symbiota portal. The Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute is a Symbiota portal. Okay, any other questions? Frank.
Yeah, I don't know if you allow me to share the screen, then I could show you an example of a checklist that I've been working on, and also
go for it.
About those lists. Yeah, this is the checklist that I've been working on for quite a while now. It's of lichen forming fungi from Ecuador, and it has several child checklists. So it has one child checklist of the Galapagos species. And then the Galapagos species list again has checklists that are children, and those are the red list of endemic Galapagos lichens, and then also the reports of erroneous taxa, so species that have been reported from Galapagos, but are no longer confirmed from the islands. So basically, if you have a child checklist that is an erroneous report, then these are essentially not added to the main checklist. But whereas if you have children, then those are fed up upwards to the main checklist. And also, people have been asking about the source field. So when I am working on these main checklists, then I'm using the source field basically as the field that includes the references. And currently, Symbiota has no tools to automatically generate a literature list. But what you can do, you can actually add different versions of the checklist as a link, and you can also make a reference list as a PDF file. And then by making a PDF file, you can then download that essentially from your checklist as a literature list. So there's options to kind of finagle around and work on this and essentially add such a literature list to your checklist. And so these are tools that hopefully will be at some point added to the checklist.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Frank. It's a really impressive checklist that you've been working on. I know you've put a lot of effort into it.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I know we're over time, but it's a very rich subject. Well, thanks, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and close us down for the day. Oh, Ed, you had a comment?
One quick comment.
Mm-hmm.
So when you create a checklist and you link vouchers, there are times where experts will go and visit those vouchers within their area, and they might annotate the specimens, the linked vouchers, which may be due because of misidentification or a taxonomic treatment. Maybe there were new species was created and they're moved to something else. There is a tube tool, a tab within the voucher management thing that says conflicts. And if you go there and you monitor that, it will tell you inform you of situations where this happens. Sometimes it lists names though too because of taxonomy changes or synonyms, non-synonyms. So it doesn't mean that you have to totally clean that out, but if there is it tells you if it's a way of monitoring to see if any of your vouchers were annotated and changed to a totally different identification.
Yeah, great point. The other tabs that I didn't talk about were adding an image voucher, which is just if you have an image, but you don't have a specimen associated with it, you can just say, oh, I'm going to add one image. And then also the reports tab will show you some options for downloading your checklist, which is very important. So just the species with the vouchers, just the vouchers, an Excel export. So you got a lot of options that you can search through here. Thanks for those notes, Ed. I had forgotten that I had missed those. Thanks again, everyone. And, oh, one more.
I was just going to say there's a lot there. At some point, we can even do an advanced checklist management thing, because there's tools where you could break your checklist up into multiple sub checklists and yeah, so
yeah, for sure.
And that's all. Sorry.
Nope, no problem at all. No, there's always, I am still learning stuff about checklists. So it's, like I said, a really rich tool. Just a reminder, no Symbiota support group next week, but we'll see you again in July. We'll be sending out the dates for that in the future. And if you have anything that you want covered, any things that you're still unclear on, shoot us an email, and we're happy to make a meeting based off of the topics that interest you. Thanks, everyone.
Katie, can you stay on a minute?
Yeah.